Welcome to The Dreamboat. This is where we explore everything to do with dreams.
We are sponsored by the DRI, Centre for Dream Studies, and you can find out more about our work in the show notes.
You can join us here every fortnight or at one of our dream courses, workshops, or retreats. Thank you for coming on board.
Well, here I am back on the Dreamboat, and of course I am, as it's now episode 10, and it's our regular Q&A slot. I'm joined by David Billington, who is the head of the DRI, and it is nice to have you, Dave, back on the Dreamboat. We have missed you.
It's so lovely to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Well, you're always welcome, of course. And, I enjoy this slot because we do get lots of questions sent in. And honestly, everybody, please carry on sending them in because Dave and I really enjoy answering these. I can't believe that this is Series 7. I think we've been going for 2 years now, Dave. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, a little bit more, yeah.
And we've got loads lined up for Series 8. So, stay with us, guys. Watch this space. And as I said, please carry on getting in touch because the DRI is just growing and we offer so much as well as the podcast. So as always, Dave and I say, check out the website. There's a lot more interesting things happening around dreams if you feel inspired, having watched and listened to us.
Yeah, we've got some great guests coming this year, either joining us online and in person at CCPE as well. Some people you might recognize from the podcast and some new faces as well. So do come along.
Yeah. So let's get on with the questions. The first one I'm sent, and I think we can all relate to this, and I think we've possibly covered it in varying formats, but actually it's very straightforward. Why are dreams confusing? And I thought, yeah, that's actually a really good question. Why are they confusing?
And it's because they're confusing that we're here talking about them, right?
Exactly. Is it part of the appeal? And I thought, well, I can think of some, just regular hearsay and chat about it and things that you and I talk about it. But I thought I'd just go and do a little bit of research in the sort of neuroscientific world just to see what is actually out there from a neurochemical or a neuroscientific point of view. And so I liked this. It says dreams are sometimes confusing because the brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, the bit in the front, is less active, reducing logical thought while the emotional centers are highly active. This causes intense, illogical or emotional scenarios to feel real, a phenomenon known as dream reality confusion, DRC, and that can often be triggered by stress, sleep deprivation, of course, or vivid imagery. And that comes from Harvard Medical School. What do you make of that, Dave?
Well, up until you started talking about stress, sleep deprivation, I was thinking, sounds like the story of my life, really. But mostly because I live with quite vivid imagery and, have an active mind's eye, shall we say. So even with my eyes open, there's always something kind of dreamy going along around the edges. I imagine you can identify with that.
Yeah, very much so. I think a lot of, dreamers or people who dream but get it more involved through, say, something like the DRI and with other dream-related communities. I think the more you play with this stuff, the more vivid the imagination can become, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And I suppose it helps us sort out who varying characters and events and scenarios are. So they are perhaps not so confusing is one thing I would say. Yeah, I think it's something we can all relate to because dreams are illogical, I suppose. And when we're awake, logic, the prefrontal cortex probably does take over and demands a sense of logic and continuity in some way.
Yeah, I would think about it in terms, as I always come on here and bang on about Jung, but in Jungian terms, the irrational, that dreams don't follow a rational way of behaving or coming into our consciousness. And it's rational in the sense of it has been rationalized. It's put into, it's linear, it's kind of mediated in some way, as opposed to just being perceived directly. And in the Jungian model, then we have intuition and sensation that are the irrational, the perceiving functions. It's just something that happens to us directly. You don't need to think about whether you're touching something. You're just aware of it directly. And with intuition, which dreams fit in within the intuitive frame, there's something that is happening to you. There's something that is occurring within your mind, within your consciousness. And then you wake up and you start to think about it and you start to make order of it and make sense of it in a different way from that waking perspective.
Yeah, it's the making order of it, isn't it? I think when you're dreaming, and we probably all know this, it makes 100% sense. Yeah, I'm flying and, oh, yes, now I'm swimming and, yes, I'm in a field and now I'm suddenly in a house and I'm with someone who morphs into someone else. And, it all makes sense as part of the storytelling aspect, I suppose. I think the confusion comes when we wake and we then try and explain the dream or write it down. And it's then that the logicality of it sets in.
Yeah. I'm very aware of this from my own experience as somebody who probably spends too much time thinking about these things and just paying attention really closely, but of going from sleeping to waking state. And being aware of being in a dream state in which things are happening in kind of a circular, nonlinear fashion. You might revisit a scene in different ways at a couple of different times, or there might be different links between different aspects of the dream experience. It's hard to explain even just in kind of linear language in waking life. And then as I'm waking up, being aware of waking up and being aware of that process of waking up and almost feeling, I didn't know it was the prefrontal cortex, but having that knowledge now, feeling that coming online and trying to go, oh, right, so that led to that and that led to that. And this was the cause and effect of it. When actually it was an interaction. It was an internal relationship and dynamic that was going on in the dream before I started to wake up. Does that make sense to your experience?
It does. I was thinking in terms of the notion of cause and effect. What is normally cause and effect in waking life is completely subverted by the unconscious during dream life. And, something will happen while you're flying and it makes great sense to go swimming after that. That is the cause and effect. And I love the fact that the brain will accept all of that. And perhaps it is dreaming that gives us the resilience to know how to react with absurdity in the real world when we are awake. There's something about reality being subverted in some way and the normal cause and effect, in the dream world not being the same. It gives us a resilience in many ways, I think, an emotional resilience to the stupidities of life, perhaps when we're awake.
Yeah, well, and as well, we have there's that lovely word pareidolia, that we are pattern-seeing creatures. We see patterns sometimes even when they're not there, but that's what allows a circle with two dots and a line in it to look like a smiley face for us, right? And we see images in clouds and so on. And it's part of being a human, but I think it's also part of what allows us to expect things from the future based on the past. And the waking mind, the active mind, and the logical mind are very good at looking at what happened and trying to predict the future based on that. Really useful, very helpful for survival. If there was a lion around the corner, don't go around that corner next time. Really, really practical. But it's limited because, of course, what happens next doesn't always exactly follow the pattern of what happened last. And being able to deal with the unexpected and being able to have that creativity to create the unexpected or to create something new is a really important part of our consciousness as well. And it can't always just be, a photocopy of what went before.
Yeah, that's really interesting that just to explore what you're saying, I've never really thought about this before, but is dreaming part of our survival instinct in that it gives us the ability to look at an absurdity and a stupidity and have the flexibility to look at how that might play out in different scenarios, because the brain has plasticity in a different way when we're sleeping. And so that we can, when we encounter something that is odd or different, we aren't just completely frozen by it. We can go with it and explore it in some way for our safety or survival or whatnot. And it's the dream world that gives us that and keeps the brain plastic, perhaps, to adapt. I'd never thought about that before.
Well, that's where the threat simulation theory comes from. It was just that very evolutionarily based view of why we dream, or one of the reasons we might dream as a survival strategy. Being able to practice not dying in our sleep means we don't have to risk taking those chances in our waking life. We can still learn and still find out by occasionally getting it wrong in our dreams. I think there's even more to it than that, though.
Yeah. I was thinking of the Michael Shreddle work that when Michael came on several series ago now, he was working on the sort of threat simulation aspects of dreaming.
Yeah, he's done some really important work on that. It's really fascinating. I was going to take it in a slightly different direction as well, though, going back to the original question about why are dreams so confusing, and thinking about it from self-development or a spiritual development perspective. And I think one answer to that question from that side is our dreams are confusing because we're confused. And that's in our therapeutic work in psychotherapy, that's often what we're dealing with, and that's what takes us to psychotherapy in the first place, is because we're confused, we don't fully know ourselves, and we're not quite sure why things keep working out the way they do, even though it's apparently not what we want. And I think our dreams reflect that in some way. Then they will reflect back our confusing strategies or our confusion about the people around us and what's going on in our relationships. And I say that as well because I've seen it and I've experienced it. When you work with your dreams in a deep process for a while, there is a simplicity that starts to come through. And certainly my experience of being in a dream group for a long time and really working on and focusing on the more subtle levels of experience and finding that within the dream work and within the dreams, rather than it being about big complex narratives, that it becomes about colors and sensations and feelings and kind of unifying that as an experience that feels purifying is one word for it, or illuminating, not in the sense of great insights, but of being able to experience oneself more fully. And it's not a complex experience. It is actually about being with the essence of consciousness. And I wish I could say that that's a state that's achieved and then just it stays with you. But I've found that I'll go through phases of things getting complicated again as well, which is fine. And there's always more to work on.
I really like that for many reasons, in that I was thinking of it from a philosophical point of view. For a philosopher, as in the theory of personhood, it's the ability to see yourself over time and through space. It's one of the definers of personhood, of a sense of self and a sense of self-being. That becomes distorted when we're dreaming. Time is irrelevant. The spaces keep changing. They are confusing. And I think as a result, you're quite right. It enables us to step away from the standard ways of defining ourselves in the outer world, time and space. And it gives us a chance to experience other parts of ourselves that are often hampered by the time and space structure.
Yeah.
And I really like what you said, because I think it gives us an opportunity to redefine ourselves and get in touch with an emotional side or a spiritual side or another form of consciousness that is often not available when we're stuck in the sort of time and space paradigm, for want of a better explanation.
Yeah, it's really important to be able to access that, if that's the right word, or to allow ourselves to maybe it's actually about not accessing, but letting that sense of personhood drop away, so that a new experience can come in. And it reminds me about how people talk about the default mode network in terms of brain waves, what's going on in the brain, and it's a big part of how people talk about the unconscious from a neurobiological perspective now. And they're exploring it with psychedelics as well. But when you let go of that kind of linear and almost rigid sense of self and the habits of self in the conscious mind, and are able to tune into that default mode network, then actually things can start to change, and you start to realize and connect to different aspects of yourself.
So I think what we're saying is bring on the confusing dreams. They're good for us. Yeah. Okay, great question. Thank you for sending it in. And that no question is daft, because it is something that is very common and something we often ask ourselves, and yet look what it's produced. So thank you very much. That was a super question. And I often wonder whether this next question, I know we've covered it before, but I think it's time to have another sort of take on it. And it's the classic, why do we forget our dreams? And again, it's a bit like, why are dreams confusing? But there's something in it. Why do we forget our dreams? And so once again, I thought, let's see what the neuroscience says around this, because it's constantly changing all the time. So here we go. This is from Scientific American. And apparently we forget our dreams, according to the neuroscientists, primarily because the brain, specifically during REM sleep, which for those of you who don't know is the area or the sleep wave pattern where we tend to dream. So if it isn't optimized for storing new long-term memories due to low levels of norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine?
Well done, norepinephrine. Well done, Dave.
My best guess. I don't really know.
which is basically I think it's an amino acid, isn't it? It's a hormonal function.
Or neurotransmitter, yeah.
Neurotransmitter, that's right. And so basically, we forget our dreams because during REM we have low levels of norepinephrine and electrical changes. So it says here, the brain treats most dream content as irrelevant, with short-term memories often fading in 30 seconds. Other key factors include active brain-driven forgetting, awakening outside of the REM phases, and then not being able to record our dreams immediately, so they instantly go. I don't know. What do you make of all of that, Dave? I'm sort of left struggling with the neurotransmitter chemical hormone.
Yeah, I won't go there because it's not my area. But it's interesting to hear that. What I hear in that is this is how we forget our dreams. It doesn't say why.
Yeah, good point.
And in some ways, from that perspective, there might not be a why. It might just be that this is it happens because of these functions. I mean, there's another side to it in terms of both neurological and psychological study, which is about the role of dreams in memory. That there's no causal or clear causal link that I'm aware of, but that dreams are related to our memory consolidation processes that are going on when we're sleeping. So, all the things that happen in the day, and it's one of the reasons why things that happen in the day, particularly things that have a big impact or things that are repetitive in the day are more likely to appear in our dreams, is because the brain is going through this process of sorting out memories and trying to figure out what's important, what's not important, I say figure out, making it sound like there's another brain in the brain doing this.
Perhaps there is.
But it is that process, because we can't remember we don't have capacity to remember every detail about everything all the time. And for those few people who do have that, it's actually quite difficult because you remember everything and it's really hard to kind of focus on the present when you have that. It's a neurological condition. But looking at that then and what's happening with the memory consolidation, what that means is this process of forgetting that's going on. It's forgetting the right stuff and remembering the right stuff. And it's not fully an answer, but it brings to mind what happens when there's a traumatic memory, for example. I mean, we're familiar with this again from therapy work. Something that's traumatic, the emotional content and the factual content of the memory stay connected together. And then every time there's something that reminds us of that, then we have the triggering effect. We have the trauma response coming up as if the body responding, the brain responding as if that event was happening again right now. And of course, then you have PTSD dreams that do the same thing, reliving the situation, in particular when it's an impactful trauma. But it can be relational and complex as well. And what needs to happen in that, people work with, for example, EMDR, bilateral stimulation, in order to aid the brain in forgetting, in a way, disconnecting the full emotional content from the factual content. And that allows it then to fade into the background a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'm intrigued by the relationship between this question and the last one. And I wonder if things are confusing, the brain can't store it because it is confusing. And then while we're living it, we're perhaps living something that's confusing. We're rehearsing, as we discussed, varying options and looking at different scenarios. But when we're awake, do we really need to remember that? It's been processed and somehow or other, perhaps a new scenarios, like let's carry on with the image that you brought in before, the lion round the corner. So what would I do if there was a lion round the corner? You've rehearsed that in the dream and it's confusing. Do you need to remember it? Possibly not. You just need to remember the emotional state of how you felt about a lion being around the corner. I don't know. I think the two aspects are related, and sometimes things are too confusing, so the brain can't remember them because they are illogical. But I think a lot of people who ask this question often, I know we've talked about this before, and during the pandemic, people didn't have to wake up to an alarm clock. And so suddenly they were allowing themselves the natural process of coming to from the sleep state, and were in that sort of liminal state between sleep and wake, which we all can recognize. We've all been there. But an alarm clock gets rid of that. And you're suddenly sleeping and dreaming, and suddenly click, you're awake because of the alarm clock, and the brain just dumps everything. You're not in that hazy liminal area where some of the neurotransmitters are there helping us to remember. We just lose that aspect, and so we can't seize the dream at the moment of waking.
Yeah. And also you're not able to sit with the feeling of it. We've said before when we've been talking, I can't remember answering what question, but that part of the source of dreams is feeling. It starts from the feeling or the emotion, and then the imagery and then the narrative get added to that. And so when your alarm goes off and it gives you a shot of adrenaline, like it's a shock, particularly when it's early in the morning and you've interrupted your sleep cycle, then that's what you're experiencing. You're in that sensation and in that feeling of being disturbed, maybe a bit scared, jolted, and that will make the feeling of the dream fade quickly into the background.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's another piece here from Scientific American which says it calls it the process of active forgetting. And apparently research suggests that specific neurons activated during the dream REM sleep may intentionally help the brain actively forget the night's dreams. And so that it helps us dump a lot of the material because we don't need it in everyday life.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually quite interesting. So it's known as active forgetting. And I think lucid dreamers have to learn how to actively forget. Otherwise, a lot of material gets carried over into waking life and can be, back to the other subject matter, confusing.
I say back to the DRC, and not the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the dream reality confusion.
Exactly. And so, there's something, I think a lot of the forgetting possibly is neurochemical in some way, that new hormones like, as you say, adrenaline and cortisol kick in because we're having to get up and we've got to awake, and we're attaching to our normal reality where we can't have confusing material there because we need to get on with the world. So I think the two things are quite interrelated, these two questions.
The Dreamboat is a project of the DRI Centre for Dream Studies. If you're the kind of person who is fascinated by the mystery of dreams and you want to learn more about the transformational power of dream work, check out our workshops, lectures, retreats, and training courses at driccpe.org.uk. Also on the website, you can support the podcast and all of DRI's work by becoming a member for just over £30 a year. That gets you discounts and first access for our ticketed events, as well as access to videos and extra material online. That's driccpe.org.uk, and you can find the link in the show notes. Now back to the podcast. Something really fascinating in this, and in both questions, is about how much of our consciousness we need to suppress at any moment in our waking life in order to be able to just, get down the stairs, get to work on time, and that includes, what we have to suppress. Again, coming back to psychotherapy, this is what we learn, what we've had to ignore, what we've had to suppress or kind of get rid of in terms of personality, but also, you don't have the space to be sitting there with all the imagery, all the intuitive senses going at the same time as you're picking up everything through your external senses, at the same time as thinking all the thoughts and feeling all the feelings. You need to be able to focus, and that means suppressing some of that information from time to time. But it's helpful from time to time, again, to come back to it and say, what is it that's in that suppressed material? Is there something else that I could be paying attention to that's really got something to say to me or to communicate with me right now? And that makes me think of how, we talk about symbols working in dreams, that in a way, a symbol is something that wants to be known from the unconscious, which is, it's not a scientific way of talking about it, but I think it's a very effective way of thinking about and approaching what comes up in our dreams. What is it that's trying to come to our attention? And it will try at first very subtly, and maybe that's something we can be with. But if it's something that we are more used to suppressing or that we don't want to get near, then it has to come to us with more of an emotional impact. And so it's like the subconscious or the unconscious is experimenting with the different images and the different connections that can be made so that the symbolic material does enter into consciousness and we allow ourselves to have a relationship to it, or at least we can't avoid it. And that's when maybe it comes across as a nightmare or something we're frightened of and trying to get away from.
Yeah, I really like that. Great question. Thank you very much. I think we should say, if you do want to remember your dreams, obviously there are a few tips and hints that we sort of mentioned before. I think for me, the main one is go to bed with the intention that you will remember your dream. I think, again, that helps the brain sort of focus on something. But also just allow yourself, perhaps over a weekend, not to have the alarm on and just when you're waking up gradually and naturally, see if you can stay with the images and just have a pen and paper by the side of your bed and write it down. Often just remembering one image, I call it the rabbit tail of a dream as it's disappearing down the rabbit hole. If you can just hold on to one image, sometimes you can pull back the whole dream. And so I think that's my key tip. Have you got a tip at all, Dave?
No, just that. As they say, write them down. I mean, for sleep hygiene, it's not a great idea to have your phone nearby, but we know that you do anyway. So if you've got your phone there, you can use it. You can record a voice note, and the technology's there to do dictation as well from voice to text. So you can just mumble it into your app.
Yeah, exactly. Much to the annoyance if you're sleeping with someone else.
Yeah, well, the phone doesn't mind if you have morning breath.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. So our last question, over to you, Dave. I think we've got enough time for another one.
Okay. So this is something that came up in conversation with a student recently, and I thought it was really fascinating because it touched on something of mine as well, a dream of mine. And this was a trainee psychotherapist who came up and said that a client had been wanting to talk about a dream and hesitating because it was sort of quite disturbing. And then finally, when they'd shared the dream, he was quite shocked because he'd had that dream before. And in that case, I think the client was a recurring dream, and it was a recurring dream that he'd had as well. And then when he told me what the content of the dream was, I had that dream as well, just once. I hadn't had it as a recurring dream. So I thought it really opens up a question about, what happens if you are having the same dreams as somebody else? And, well, let me just put that to you, Laura. Have you had that experience, or what do you think about it?
I have, actually, in the same situation where a client's dream, the therapist's dream, and I as a supervisor, we had all had roughly the same dream, and it left me feeling utterly fascinated. I think you can look at it in many ways, and you get this within families as well, and couples often share dreams because they're lying next to each other. And I often think the dream matter is like sort of filaments coming out of the head. It sort of merges in some strange way. One of our guests this series, Edward Bruce Bynum, talks a lot about families sharing dreams. Even though they might not be in the same house, they can collectively share dreams. And for me, I think that's one of the clues. Jung would very much say that we have a collective unconscious or consciousness, and it's where this material resides for someone else to pull down in some way. I don't know. What are you left with?
It takes me to that collective side as well, that there are universal experiences that we might all be able to relate to. And there's a part of me that, as you're aware of, kind of approaches things with a bit more of a skeptic's hat on as well. There's the fascination in that, okay, well, what's really going on here? How can we kind of get under the surface? So I'll share that bit as well, which is, I'd be really interested to know if you had those three people independently write down those dreams in detail, and then you looked at them in detail, how much would be the same and how much would be different?
Interesting thought.
So there's a structure there. And again, this takes me back to the collective piece, which is that there's a structure there, which is something universal or shared, or that might, you might have a relationship to from different angles. But it comes into consciousness through the individual experience. So, for example, I'll tell you the version of the dream that I had, even though it was a little bit disturbing, which was that in the dream, it was me and a childhood friend. And in the dream, we had murdered somebody and in the past, and sort of got away with it. And then, but I was sort of kind of remembered this, quote unquote, in the dream, like, oh God, that really happened, and what if somebody finds out? And it was such a powerful experience that when I woke up, I had to kind of convince myself that but I didn't murder anybody. I just got to go through this process of it, because it felt so very real.
Well, that's a
And
fascinating dream.
yeah, yeah. And there was a kind of the kind of guilt and the fear of exposure and all the things that were there. And I didn't interrogate the student, and I don't know enough about the client that they were working with to know exactly about it. But so there's an overall scenario there, which you can find in a dozen or 20 TV programs any evening.
Exactly.
You can find some version of that.
Yeah.
But that's sort of less interesting. There's, we have a fascination with that culturally about crime and that kind of thing. In terms of my own process, I would look at that in terms of what might my relationship to guilt be about, or what is it that I'm scared of people discovering, and I've got as much imposter syndrome as the next guy, so there might be something about that, or what is it that gets killed off, or at what stage in life? It's such a huge part of growing up is separating out those parts of yourself and then rediscovering them later on. So all of that's very personal. That's very personal to me. And it was, an actual person that I know was the friend, who was a childhood friend. So that's, clearly these other people weren't dreaming about the same person because they never met them.
Yeah.
If they were, then that's even more fascinating, of course. But
oh God, that'd be really spooky.
Yeah.
I'm left thinking about the notion of annihilation and what, as you say, what bit of self is needing to be killed off or being desired to be killed off in both client, therapist, and oneself. And for me, I often, when this moment happens, I often call these moments divine transference. And anybody in the psychotherapy world knows about, what transference means, what's being passed over from client to therapist. And often it gets passed to the supervisor of the therapist. So there's something sitting in the collective crucible, for want of a better description, in the flask, the alchemical, I want to be alchemical at this moment, in the container, that we're putting this material in, and there's a lot of shared material that then comes back. And for me, these are the moments. If I've dreamt it as well, then what am I being asked by the divine to look at on behalf of the client and the therapist that I might be looking after? And so there's something that we're almost being signposted to because we were all having the same information. And it's almost like a sort of a big shout out, look at this.
Yes.
And so there's something about the collective force of three people sharing a dream, and also remembering it, back to what we were saying before. So there's something that we're being asked to look at because all three people have remembered it.
Yeah, yeah. Just to add to that, I had a thought when this came up, which was, because in my case, it sort of came out of nowhere. I'd kind of, it didn't connect anything that I was preoccupied with. It wasn't a feeling that has been on my mind. And it was in the back of my mind. And then I kind of thought, when the student brought it up, I thought, maybe I had that dream just so I could say I had the dream and be kind of reassuring on that basis. Because for me, a lot of years of therapy, a lot of years of doing this work, my sense of self isn't disturbed by having a dream like that. I'm interested in it, I'm curious about it, but I'm okay, and I'm fine about it. The student was a little bit taken aback by it, and the client was really troubled by it. The client really took it literally, that maybe there was something that they had done that that was going to be discovered and they would be exposed. So it's something about being able to pass that through that network, as you say, that line of inquiry through the student and the supervisee and the client, being able to be reassuring. This is a normal experience. It's just a dream. It's something to be interested in.
Yeah. It's something exactly. There's something to be curious in. Even, obviously the student hopefully isn't sharing the fact that they had the same dream with the client, because if they did, that's a very interesting intervention in its own right. And, but...
Yeah, I don't think they did, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I love it. And I know a lot of research has been done on dream sharing. And perhaps it's a subject that we should come back to in the next series and have a look at what research is out there. But I know that some of our guests have mentioned it before, and that families often not only share similar dreams, but share ancestor dreams as well. So, dreaming of people who have passed over and who have died within the family, they're dreamt of at the same time, which I think is also A, beautiful, but B, fascinating. It's as if something of the person has died is still in the collective consciousness and is choosing to come back in and talk to varying family members. And that in its own right is obviously clearly very powerful.
And I'd encourage anyone who's interested in this sort of thing to look at the work of Stanley Krippner. That's Krippner, Krippner, who has decades of research looking at dream sharing, dream telepathy, being able to meet one another in dreams, and was one of the instigators of the contests at the conferences of the International Association for the Study of Dreams.
Oh, yes.
Where there'd be somebody who's focusing on an image and then seeing if the other people dreaming at the conference can pick up the image.
Yeah.
I don't feel like there's anything quite definitive in that research, but there's some really fascinating stuff that comes up from it.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we'll return to this because it's a subject area that a lot of people are interested in.
Yeah.
So thank you for the questions. They were the ones that jumped out at us this time round, but we still would like to hear from you. And so, Dave, thank you for joining me again at the end of Series 7. My gosh, Series 7. Perhaps we'll have a party for Series 10.
Absolutely we should.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you for keeping it all going, Laura. It's really wonderful to be able to be in the audience for 9 episodes out of 10 and see what you and Rena are getting up to.
I'm glad we can drag you back in. Anyway, thank you as well, listeners. Thank you for following us and joining in. And I hope you continue to listen and enjoy Series 8, which should be following on the back of this, quite on its heels. So many thanks. So I think from me, sweet dreams.
And from me, it's keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.
So thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.